Um, Good afternoon, YouTube. I decided to make this video after kind of heavily contemplating on it because of the fact that my mom might not be happy with this, but I really want to make this video because I want to incorporate a lot of the actual chemistry that's going on. Because in fact, I'm taking organic chemistry. I thought it would just be good practice for me to try and explain it to a camera and strengthen my overall understanding. So the topic of this video is the chemistry, pharmacodynamics, pharmacokinetics, mechanisms of actions of amphetamine, and yeah, I'm going to be explaining all that in this video, and I'll try to include timestamps so people can skip around, so they don't get bored if they're not interested in a certain thing. And in the end, I'll end up going into practical protocols and how to dose such a drug. I do want to note that I am not a physician. Please consult your PCP. I'm not liable in any way for any damages caused. I'm simply making this purely for educational purposes to put out onto the internet to educate people of the dangers, but also the powers and the chemistry of this drug. Without further ado, I'm going to be starting off with the chemistry of this drug. So take this camera and yeah, get going. So here's amphetamine. If you research up like amphetamine chemical structure, you're going to find this. However, it doesn't go into full detail. And if you've ever taken organic chemistry, you'll be acquainted with line and wedge drawings. And so this is the dextroisomer of amphetamine, where you'll have the methyl group coming out towards you and the hydrogen group going away from you on the carbon side chain. And I went ahead and did the rotary notation of this, showing the priority groups. And this is the dextro rotation is going to be S rotary, while the lever rotation is going to be R rotary. If you can literally see that these are enantiomers of each other, basically meaning that these are non-superimposable mirror images of each other, with the only difference being at this stereocenter right here, where the methyl group is actually going away from us now. Going into the synthesis of these, it's actually going to start off with an alkene. Typically in a lab, it's going to undergo hydroxymercuration, or it will be treated with an extremely strong oxidizing agent from phenethylamine, using chromic acid or other things. However, I've just shown the standard way, starting off with the base alkene. It's going to undergo hydroxymercuration, yielding this, and then it's going to have amine addition and methyl addition via methylation. This actually happens organically, not even, well, in our body, when we start off with phenethylamine, this will happen actually organically in our body through our body's endogenous enzymes. But in a lab, this undergoes through different mechanisms using inorganic acids and solvents. This is the racemic mixture, basically showing that when this is produced in a lab, it is 50% levo, 50% dextro, or in other ways, 50% S rotation, 50% R rotation. By the way, even though these are both rotating counterclockwise, this one is actually R rotation because the hydrogen is going away from us, it's coming towards us instead of going away from us. And this one, we can simply look at this at face value. Yeah. In a lab, these are typically separated for pharmaceutical purposes, for the purpose of, I guess, medicine, really, because one enantiomer, particularly the dextro enantiomer, is far much more effective at treating ADHD, which is what amphetamine is typically used for, than the levo enantiomer. And this is typically done through a variety of methods. This can be done through HPLC, high-profile liquid chromatography. This is also done typically with, what's it called? I forgot what it's called. It's the mechanism through which scientists would make, sorry for the noise, scientists would create columns of silica gel, and at the top of it, they would put allulose, which is levo glucose, and then dextroglucose, which is the normal glucose that we typically find, and they'll shine light through it. And what happens is that because they're enantiomers of each other, these two glucose, they polarize, plain polarized light, only allowing certain light to come up. And so when they have their racemic mixtures at the bottom of the silica columns, only the dextroisomers are going to elude or move closer to that glucose cap. And then in that way, we'll be leaving the levo enantiomer, and the dextro enantiomer is going to rise to the top and collect on that glucose cap, which is typically why you'd actually see oftentimes you're going to find amphetamine saccharate. But in other situations, one would find amphetamine sulfate because another method of separating out the enantiomers is scientists will actually take racemic amphetamine and then they will turn it into diastereomers, typically through the addition of tartaric acid. And then because diastereomers will have different chemical properties, they can do distillation or other methods of extraction and isolation to then isolate the different diastereomers, and then through other chemical processes turn it back into dextroamphetamine, which is typically what is wanted for pharmaceutical purposes, and the levoamphetamine is thrown out. However, going into the common brand names, you will find in Adderall, which is probably the most common brand name that people are familiar with, it's a 75% dextro mixture to a 25% levo mixture, which is pretty ideal. However, for medicinal purposes, Dexedrine, which is 100% dextro enantiomer, is most effective. However, it is expensive simply because of the fact that you're wasting half of your product when you produce amphetamine. Other things that are extended release formations are just XR Adderall or Vyvanse, which is lisdexamphetamine. It's a dexamphetamine, which is great because it won't have any of the side effects associated with levoamphetamine. I'll get into that very soon. However, it's extended release because it's bound to a lysine group, which what happens is it's a prodrug basically. It's inactive in its pure form, but when it's digested in the gut, trypsin and pepsin will actually cleave off the lysine group from the drug, and then when it goes into the blood plasma, it is basically dextroamphetamine, and there is bioavailable and has a pharmacokinetic, has psychoactive properties. Going into the history, this drug is actually pioneered in and around World War II, actually used by Hitler himself and a lot of his other troops, which is however, they actually end up using a lot of methamphetamine, which is far much more potent, and it has a whole lot more serotonergic activity. This is typically used during their blitzkrieg attacks, which explains why they were so effective at doing this, because they came in with such energy that gave them superhero-like abilities, or made them feel as if this had superhero-like abilities, and it was oftentimes abused by such soldiers to combat the depression faced in being in the trenches and to promote wakefulness. However, they were clearly abusing it back in World War II. Once again, I want to reiterate, I am not advocating for the abuse of this drug. I'm simply making this video for pure educational purposes. Now, going into the mechanism of action of this drug, here I've made out a little demonstration. This is the presynaptic neuron. This is the postsynaptic neuron of a dopamine receptor. Here I've drawn, let me get my pencil for more precise, these little dopamine molecules, and this is VMAT2. VMAT2 stands for vesicular monoamine transporter 2. In layman's terms, what this is it's basically a vesicle that is created within the presynaptic neuron. And what it does is it packages up a bunch of these little dopamine molecules and it stores them like this. And so what happens is that a transmission comes through. I forgot what it's called. The neuron gets hyperpolarized and an action potential passes through. And this VMAT2 is released, causing a release of dopamine into the synaptic cleft, where it is eventually finds any of the dopamine subtype receptors, which range from 1 to 9, which all have greatly different effects within the body. Might I note that dopamine is not just used for motivation, which is God dang, camera is so shaky. Dopamine is used for a variety of purposes in the body. Not only is it used for motivation, but it's also used for locomotion and movement, as we see in Parkinson's disease, which Parkinson's patients have a degradation of a subtype of their dopamine neurons, particularly the D9 neurons. And dopamine is related to sex drive, libido, what's called hunger, nausea, and, as I said, reward. Now, I've just explained the normal mechanism of action of just dopamine, like your endogenous release of dopamine without amphetamine. Now, what amphetamine does, particularly dextroamphetamine, as levoamphetamine has very little CNS activity, levoamphetamine has more sort of activity in the periphery of the body, which causes heart palpitations as a side effect, vasoconstriction, things that don't really have any medicinal purposes, which is why, once again, pharmaceutical companies figured this out and wanted to create a more potent version of the drug that allowed patients to take literally half the dosage, but keep the same level of dopamine transmission, so there were fewer side effects, and patients could get a more potent drug. Going back into the mechanism of action, amphetamine, what this does is it binds to VMAT2, and I used to think that it actually increases the rate of VMAT2 of how quickly it oscillates in and out, and it pumps out dopamine molecules. However, it actually does quite the opposite, and it works in an interesting manner where it disrupts VMAT2 production. And what this happens is that dopamine is being produced at a normal rate within the presynaptic neuron. However, because the vesicle isn't being produced properly, it's taking longer and longer and longer to be produced. So what happens is, instead, when amphetamine comes around, when the vesicle finally gets produced, it's just going to be chock full of dopamine, just full of it, like that. And then when an action potential finally comes around, it's just going to come out in a big burst, which is going to alleviate ADHD symptoms and is going to give those characteristic feelings of hyperfocus, in some cases agitation, and overall motivation that people experience. And it's going to end up giving a whole lot more dopamine in the synaptic cleft, which is then going to feed into the dopamine receptors on the presynaptic cleft. Here I've drawn an MAOI to actually make a point and show that there's a misconception and dopamine transporter to explain a misconception that amphetamine does not act as a reuptake inhibitor. Cocaine and methylphenidate, on the other hand, which is another popular option, not cocaine. Cocaine does not have any efficacious, it's really not efficacious at treating ADHD. However, methylphenidate is, as it works on basically preventing the reuptake of drugs. I may go into this in another video where I explain the mechanism of action of methylphenidate, but to put it shortly, amphetamine does not act on DAT and does not act on monoamine oxidase, so the rate of reuptake is still going to be the same. Now going into kind of the pathways it acts on within the brain. So in people who typically have ADHD, they're going to have a high level of tonic dopamine, which basically means that their standard their standard neurochemistry is going to be like this. It's going to have a lot of tonic dopamine, but they're not going to have that much phasic dopamine. They're not going to have that much release. So it takes a lot for them to feel anything, really. That's why we often see people with ADHD engaging in risky behaviors, because they easily get bored and they need huge bursts of adrenaline or exciting activities to stay engaged and motivated in the classroom, in life, and in other things in general. And so what this does is amphetamine, it actually basically takes that tonic dopamine and it shifts it into creating more phasic dopamine. So people, regardless if they have ADHD or not, are going to end up having less tonic dopamine, having more phasic dopamine, because, as I just explained, the VMAT2 production is going to be disrupted. And whenever an action potential is going to come around, there's going to be huge lump sum of dopamine being dumped in the synaptic cleft. Here I've noted that it shifts dopamine transmission from the mesolimbic system to the mesocortical system. Now, the mesolimbic system is kind of what people talk about as being the lizard brain. This is tied to the ventral tegmental pathway, which spans from the VTA itself, which is adjacent to the substantia nigra, all the way to the nucleus accumbens, which, if you studied any psychology or any subtype of psychology, you'll know that the nucleus accumbens plays a very important role in addiction, and it's found within the limbic system. And now, this is particularly bad because it's going to, having high amounts of dopamine in this pathway is going to have people motivated towards more primal things, or as one likes to say, being more lizard brain inclined. Let me put the camera back towards myself because we're going back towards dialogue. And it's going to shift a lot of the focus away from the mesolimbic system. The mesolimbic system is primarily engaged in things like seeking out food, seeking out sex, seeking out quick short-term gratification releases of dopamine. But these things, as we all know, are not very conducive to living a productive life. So amphetamine is going to shift the dopamine transmission from the mesolimbic pathway away from it to the mesocortical pathway, which is regulated by the substantia nigra, which is found within the basal ganglia. The dopamine, surprisingly, is actually produced in the reticularis, which is actually, if you were to do a biopsy of the brain of of the substantia nigra, you'll actually see it's colored dark from the high amounts of dopamine neurons and the dopamine that is produced there from its precursor phenylalanine and L-tyrosine. And this is going to be this is going to play, I don't know, lots of words. This is going to play a very important role in the mesocortical pathway, which is going to be linked to decision making, delaying gratification, and long thought processes. People on ADHD medications, especially amphetamine, actually often linked their experience with being overly optimistic, and they often tend to think about the future and have good feelings about the future because they tend to actually end up thinking about the future, and they think optimistic about their future plans and the things they want to do. That's just something I've noted as a weird side effect that I found from other anecdotal reports online, which I suppose is tied to this shift from the mesolimbic system to the mesocortical system. This is why amphetamines and methylphenidate is linked to increasing good behavior in people who have ADHD, not only increasing their motivation and performance in studies and within the classroom. So yes, going away from that now, I'm going to the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. It is broken down or metabolized by cytochrome P2D6, which is a subtype of the cytochrome P450 enzymes, which span a broad gamut of enzymes that break down multiple things within the body. This just yields in the products of 4-hydroxyamphetamine and 4-hydroxynorepinephrine. That's that. Most of the drug, however, based on the acidity of the urine, is going to be left unchanged. The more alkaline the urine, the less the drug is actually going to be metabolized, and so the more of it will actually get into the water system, which is definitely not good. The more acidic the urine, the more the drug will be broken down. Yes, most of the drug is excreted by urine. Somewhat of it is left intact. The half-life of this drug is 9 to 11 hours, which can be problematic for certain people based on the polymorphism of the CYP2D6 gene that you have. Some people, just like with caffeine, respond very well to caffeine, or they have a little response to caffeine, in that they can drink espresso at night and still fall asleep just fine, while other people can't have espresso past, let's say, 12 or 11 a.m. And if they do have caffeine past that time, no matter what the dosage is, they will not be able to sleep because they have very weak CYP2D6 enzymes. And this all goes down to a microscopic level of the genes, where there's a substitution of the AC into an AA allele. These are just some variations that all depend on your own genetics. An individual could get a 23andMe test and have their genes analyzed, but it's really not worth it. The best way to understand or figure out if the drug is for you is to just try it out for yourself and see how it affects your sleep. However, because of the exceptionally long half-life, it can disrupt sleep. The Cmax is going to be roughly anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. What the Cmax is peak plasma concentration. So this is the point at which the drug is going to have the peak effect in your body. Other side effects can include just nausea, irritation, irritability, especially in people who have ADHD. However, irritability in people who don't have ADHD, what I've noticed and what I've seen on anecdotal reports, people who have ADHD typically are overall just better citizens. They're a whole lot less irritable. They have an easier time obeying commands and not breaking rules, and function better in social situations, as they just find that life is a whole lot more bearable for them. That's just what I've heard. Going into the practical protocols of this drug, please do not abuse this. Once again, I'm making this video for educational purposes only. Do take frequent breaks, but because of the fact that amphetamine is going to increase the dopamine levels in your brain to super physiological effects, which is ultimately going to lead to downregulation, because dopamine is one of the most neurotoxic catecholamines that is produced within the body, and you do not want to have a death of dopaminergic neurons that is going to ruin your life. Always consult your PCP and start with the lowest effective dose. You do not want to be taking 10 milligrams starting out. Probably start out with 5, but if that doesn't do anything for you, then perhaps do move on. One could also try L-tyrosine and mecunopurines. These are basically precursors along the dopamine production pathway that are going to take out the rate-limiting step, as mecunopurines is linked to the production of L-dopa, and L-tyrosine will basically have your body not rely on the production of phenethylamine. I've included some natty alternatives. Cold plunge. This has been shown to greatly increase the level of dopamine and also norepinephrine in your brain. I forgot to add. Amphetamine does also greatly increase the level of norepinephrine in the brain, as well as slight increases of serotonin. Methamphetamine, and on the other and in addition to methamphetamine, methylene dioxymethamphetamine, which is MDMA, has been shown to greatly increase the amount of serotonin in the brain. However, amphetamine alone does not increase that much. Amphetamine alone has been shown to not increase the level of serotonin within the brain. Intense exercise has been shown to increase levels of dopamine. TRT and sleep. Now, I know I said natty alternatives, but what I mean by TRT is basically increasing your baseline level of testosterone, which is just going to be through proper supplementation of magnesium and zinc, and following the other protocols that are going to raise your baseline level of testosterone. An individual could even take such things as HCG or enclomiphene. And I actually want to bring that back into the tuberoinfundibular pathway. Now, this is not directly related to into like the classical effects that we see with increased driving motivation. The reason why dopamine is actually produced in the tuberoinfundibular pathway is because of the fact that it has an inverse relationship with prolactin. Now, for perspective, the tuberoinfundibular pathway is basically the pathway that is found between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. And as most, endocrinologists, as all endocrinologists know, that this is a very important pathway, as the hypothalamus releases many hormones that then signal paracrine hormones that then signal the pituitary to release other hormones, things like HGH, things like LH, FSH, things that all have very important roles in our body at regulating our endocrine system. However, within the tuberoinfundibular system, prolactin is also produced. In levels where the body is high in prolactin, this will actually have an inverse effect on dopamine production. So, because the tuberoinfundibular pathway does also produce dopamine and does also produce prolactin, this hormone and this neurotransmitter, they're going to have an inverse relationship with each other. The higher prolactin is, the lower your dopamine is. This is actually why we typically see fathers who have pregnant wives typically have a decrease in motivation and overall drive because their prolactin is going to be greater. This prolactin is going to lead to an increase of adipose production, but in women is also going to be conducive for the production of lactation, which is literally why it's called prolactin. It's good for lactation. That's its role in women. What this means in practical application is, in order to greatly increase dopamine as a natty alternative, is to actually practice nofap or to abstain from sex or abstain from masturbation, because of the fact that masturbation has been shown to greatly increase prolactin and greatly lower testosterone. This is ultimately going to lower your baseline level of dopamine, and it's going to feed into your mesolimbic system, which is not what you want for overall productivity. So that's just a natty alternative that one can do, and I hope I did provide a good, concise explanation of that without rambling too much. Now, I hope you guys really did enjoy this video. Please do leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. I'm going to try to provide some timestamps so that people can skip around and find the desired parts they want. Like I said, I'm not a physician. I'm not responsible for any damages caused by me putting this knowledge out onto the internet. I really just want to make this for educational purposes so that people can benefit from this. Like I said, please do leave me a comment. I hope you guys have a good day. Goodbye.